discern these words, apply them to our hearts. We're living, if we're given the opportunity to live another day, if tomorrow comes for us, we can take these newfound.
Remember, we started out, the first chapter was about the deity of Christ. And as he starts out, he shows all of those wonderful things about the deity of Christ. And then he shows us over here about angels. And so he compares the angels to Christ. And angels are servants, Christ is deity. Then we moved into chapter 2. And there is where we talked about the humanity of Christ. Now, we're not going to go back over talking about the things that we've already talked about there in the humanity of Christ, but we want to start out in chapter 2 and verse 11. Now, this is the chapter that this is the verse that we closed on. We're going to start at that verse that we closed on. So if you remember, we talked about that it says, both he that sanctifieth and them that are sanctified, back here, are all one. Talking about they are human. They are of one nature in here, for which cause he is not ashamed to call them brethren. Now, as we start then tonight here, we're going to find in the next verse that we have here, he comes out and he says this, for verily not to angels doth he give help, but he giveth help to the seed of Abraham. So now, keep this statement in mind. If we don't put it in context, it makes no sense whatsoever to just start out where we're starting out tonight. Remember, he's starting out, Christ is deity. Then chapter 2, Christ became a human. And as he became a human just like his fellow man, so that he could come down and he could die on that cross and he could save us from our sins. Now then, he said, for verily not to angels doth he give help, but he giveth help to the seed of Abraham. That is, when Christ came, he didn't come to save angels. He came to the seed of Abraham. He came to humanity. He came to the people that came out of Abraham. He came from the Jewish nation. He was a human. And so what he's saying is that when Christ came to this earth, he didn't come to help angels. Angels are on a different plane out here that we've already talked about in here. And so he goes ahead, wherefore it behooved him. That is, it was necessary for him to do something. Wherefore it behooved him in all things to be made like unto his brethren. Now what that statement means, that he might become man or human. It was necessary for him to become a human. He came down to save humans. He didn't come down to save angels. He gave up his deity not to become an angel. He gave up his deity to become a man, coming down so that he could save human. That he might become. Now he became a human. That he might become. Now I've got here, there was another reason other than the shedding of blood. That's what I want us to note here. When he became a human, if I ask you, why did Christ become a human? Now we spent a class and a half talking about it. What is the answer? He became a human so he could shed his blood and save us from our sins. Now, we're going to find out that he became a human also, in addition to that, for another reason. So here is another reason then that we're going to be looking at. For it behooved him that in all things to be made like unto his brethren, that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God. Now, let's note this. He came down and he became a man. He became a man so he could become a certain kind of a high priest. Now, keep this in mind. When we talked about it here, he came down and he died on the cross. But now, when he died on the cross, he died, and then he went back up to heaven. And when he went back up to heaven, what happened? See? That's when he became a faithful high priest. Now, the book of Hebrews is going to say a lot about the priesthood. We're just being introduced to it here tonight. And we're seeing a very foundation principle that is taught. So let's take a look at it, and it will be repeated as we go along. But now, as we go back and study the Old Testament, we go back there and we study about the tent of meeting, the tabernacle that had the furniture in it, the holy place, the most holy place. This was all types. This was a type of the real thing that was to come. And also back there, you had your priest and you had a high priest. And there was a vast difference in the two. What is a priest? What is a priest? A priest is a what? A what? No, it's a mediator. One who can offer acceptable sacrifices. One who can offer a sacrifice acceptable to God. Now, in the Old Testament, couldn't anybody just go out and offer a sacrifice? What did they have to do? If they sinned, they went out in their field, they got the best animal that they could get, and did they just offer it to God? No. No. It had to come through a priest. So they bring it in and they give it to the priest. And the priest was a man that could offer the sacrifices that God would accept. Now, keep in mind, God is teaching those people something. God is teaching them through a type, through a pattern. Now, you might say, well, were there any wicked priests? Oh, yeah, there were wicked priests. Were there any real righteous, good men? Yeah. Why couldn't a good man, who might even be better than a priest, why couldn't he offer a sacrifice? Well, you answer that. Why couldn't he? Because God said, I will accept sacrifices only through the priesthood. Only a priest can do that. Now, by the way, when we come down now into the New Covenant, where we find that the church is the real thing, the tabernacle was the shadow, the church is a real thing, who are the priests today who can offer sacrifices that God will accept? Christians. All Christians are priests. And we can offer sacrifices that God will accept. But now, back in the Old Covenant, they had a high priest. Now, what could that high priest do that the ordinary priest was forbidden to do? They couldn't do. What did that high priest do? What was the major thing he did? He could go into the Holy of Holiest, meet with God, and offer the blood sacrifice for the people for the next year. So he had access in there to the throne of God, where he could meet with God in the Holy of Holies. Now that's what our high priest can do. Our high priest now is Jesus Christ. He has gone back up into heaven. Now we spent quite a few sermons talking about when he went up to heaven, he sat down on the throne of David, didn't he? He started ruling on David's throne. We haven't mentioned high priest. And the reason we haven't mentioned a high priest is because that's not been our sermon topic. But not only did he sit down on the throne of David, but he also became a high priest. Now this is kind of neat, because when you go back to the Old Testament, what tribe did you have to be from in order to be a priest? Aaron, Levi. What tribe did you have to be from to be a king and sit on David's throne? Judah. And later on, the book of Hebrews is going to make mention of this and show you that they were distinct. And you could say, well then, how could Christ be both? That's the unique thing. Zechariah had prophesied. When the Messiah comes, he will not only sit on the throne of David, but he will also be the priest. He'll be a king and a priest at the same time. So all of this was built into the Old Testament system, to the types, so that we can see it as we get over here. Now Jesus now is not only sitting as our king in heaven, but he's sitting there as our high priest. Now, did he offer any sacrifices for us? Jesus, our high priest? He offered his blood. He has offered his blood to God, his life, as a high priest. Now, here's the unique thing. As the high priest is sitting in heaven, notice what it says. That he might become a certain kind of a high priest. Not just any kind. But he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God. Now, he's going, the high priest, Jesus, as he's sitting on his throne in heaven, he's going to be a priest. He's offered a sacrifice for us. And now he's going to be a mediator also between us. But now here, you see I've got that arrow going both ways? This high priest has a relationship with God, and he has a relationship with man. Now, do we need to have a merciful high priest in heaven? Mercy means one who feels bad at somebody's problem. You feel hurt. You have sympathy for, and you have a desire to help. That's what being merciful is. Now, Christ now, looking down upon us, he feels for us. He hurts for us. And he has a desire to help us. Now, that's good and that's great. But can he bypass the laws of God? Would he be permitted to do that? No. He must be faithful to God. He must be faithful to God, do this in exactly the way God would have it to be done, at the same time looking down upon us poor, sinful souls, showing mercy to us. So here we have Jesus as a high priest. Now, it says he had to become a man in order to do this. Well, why did he have to become a man in order to do it? For in that he himself suffered being tempted. He is able to succor. What's that word mean? We never use that word. It's in our translations. Comfort or help. It really means to help. He is able to help them that are tempted. Now, later on, in chapter 5, we're going to cover really the same thing. Paul's going to tell us, again, the same thing there. But now, as he looks down upon us, here is Jesus, and he's merciful to us. And how can we be assured that he understands our problems? Have you ever had a problem that you felt like nobody understood except you? And when somebody said, well, I understand what you're going through. Have you ever felt, oh, no, you don't. You don't have the slightest idea what I'm going through, see? Now, even though Jesus was deity, I suppose, well, I know, he made man. He made all the emotions of man. He knew what man was all about. But what would you think about if he had never walked in your shoes? And he says, now I'm going to be your high priest. I'm going to stand between you and God. I'm going to stand between a perfect God and you bunch of sinners. You people down there now who are tempted and you constantly commit sins. But I understand. What would you think? Well, what would you think if a Rockefeller or a Kennedy came out and talked to us? And he said, now I want you to know I understand your condition at work. All of you who get up, you fight the traffic in the morning, you have a boss that's giving you all kind of trouble, you have to suffer because you're afraid you'll get fired, you have to get a check this week in order to pay the house payment, you can't afford to get sick, you're just barely scraping it out. And I want you to know I understand that. what would you think? Sure you understand that. That's what this is saying. Jesus came to earth not only to shed his blood for us, but to walk in our shoes so he could be tempted in every point like as we. There's not a temptation that you can face that he didn't face, the Bible says. He feels it. He understands it. And so now then, we have that kind of a high priest. So the humanity of Christ, remember that's what we're talking about. The humanity of Christ was not only to shed his blood, the blood of deity, but it's to walk in our shoes so he can feel our feelings, so he can function right now as our high priest. And we can go to him and we can say, Lord, I don't know what to do. Here's my problem. Nobody understands it. But the high priest can say, I've been there. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Now, chapter 3. Chapter 3 continues right on, only it's different. What the Hebrew writer does, and he's already done it once, he takes the subject that you're after, that you've been talking about, then he'll say, wherefore, because of what we've been talking about, now let me add one other point to here. Let me add another thing that's really tied into this. So in chapter 3, he said, wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of a heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession, even Jesus. Now, he said, since I've told you about him, since I've told you that deity became humanity, he came down, he suffered in all points like as we, he died on that cross to pay for your sins, he's now functioning as a high priest, faithful to God, merciful to us, everything working exactly the way we would love to have it work. Let me tell you some more about him. I want you to consider a little bit more. So I said, wherefore, holy brethren, that is, brethren that are holy, that are sanctified, partakers of the heavenly calling, we're all partakers of that calling, which is a heavenly calling. The calling comes from heaven. The calling is about heaven. And where will the calling end up with? See, those of us that listen to the call of come unto me, right? It's going to end up in heaven. So it's called a heavenly calling. Now consider the apostle and high priest of our confession. So now, he's tying it in with this high priest, but now he calls him something else. Consider the apostle and high priest of our confession. So now here's what he calls Jesus. He says he is an apostle, and he is a high priest, and he's the apostle and high priest of our confession. Let's look at each one of them. The word consider literally means carefully think. The Greek word literally means this, that I'm looking down. I'm taking my mind and I'm trying to absorb. Give real careful consideration to Jesus. Don't just glance over it. Now, the word apostle here means the same thing as it does every other place. It means one sent forth. One sent forth. Now, when we talk about apostle, what does your mind go to if you are mentally stable? What do you think about? If I told you I was going to talk about the apostles tomorrow, where would your mind go? It'd be the 12, wouldn't it? See? That's where we'd go. Now, the word apostle doesn't mean the 12 that Jesus called. The word apostle means one sent forth. That's all that it means. It means if I asked Steve now, said, Steve, would you run out in my car and get that pen I got out there? Steve runs out, brings it back. He's my apostle. I sent him forth. Now, in that case, he's Lowell's apostle, see? But now Christ had apostles. Oh, by the way, did the church have apostles in the New Testament? You remember what they did when they took up the collection to send it all down to Jerusalem? They chose men and they sent them down, and they were called apostles. They were apostles of the church. But now then, Christ chose 12 men. He chose 12 men, and why are they called apostles? What did he tell them to do? Go ye into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. You 12, you're going to be the 12 I am sending forth. So they were the apostles. They were the 12. Now they were the apostles of Christ. Now then we've got my apostle, Steve. We got the church's apostles, where they sent messengers out, sent people out to carry the money for them. Now then we've got the apostles of Christ. Now how could Christ be an apostle? Who sent him forth? God. He's an apostle of God. God sent him forth. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. So he's called an apostle in that sense. He is the one that God sent forth into this world. So now, I want you to consider the one God sent forth into this world and high priest, our high priest. So here we have the definition of priest, and then we've already talked about it, and then you have the high priest. The high priest was one who could, a priest could offer sacrifices God would accept. A high priest could go into the presence of God and offer the blood sacrifice that would cleanse them for the year. Now, he said, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession. That word confession means this. And it'll be translated in different ways. The word literally means speak the same as. That's what it means. Speak the same as. So, it can mean an admission. Now, if I send Steve out to get my pen, Steve steals $20 out of my car, I know he's doing it. He comes in, I say, Steve, you stole $20 out of my car. And he says, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. What do I mean when I say confess? What do I mean? I mean, Steve, speak the same as I'm saying. You stole $20. Now confess it. We understand what confess means in that situation. Now then, Jesus came and he made some statements. See, he made statements that I am the way, the truth, the life. No man can come to the Father except by me. He made the statement about he was deity. He was the king. He made these statements. Peter said, he asked Peter, who do you say I am? Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah. In other words, that's right. That's who I am. Now, guess what he's talking about when he says, I want you to make the good confession. Right? Make the confession. I want you to speak the same as I'm speaking. I want you to say the same thing about me that I'm saying about me. I'm the Christ. I'm deity. I'm the high priest. I'm the king. Now, make the confession. I'm the Lord. See? Make the confession. So, we can see what confession would be. Make the confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. It could be translated acknowledgement or an admission. Sometimes it is translated profession, P-R-O, profession, in some translations. Now what it would mean there is that I am professing something. I am speaking. I'm casting it out. I'm telling you tonight that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, did I make a profation? See? Did I make a confession? Did I speak the same as Jesus spoke? Yeah, you could say you did that. It's all the same word, all the same Greek word, but it's translated in different ways. Now, here's the interesting thing about this confession, and it's something we don't spend a lot of time on when we're talking about a confession. But it is the confession. Now, again, in the Greek language, they don't have the word a. So they don't even use the word a. There's lots of languages don't use the word a. When they talking about something that's just general, they'll just mention it, just that's there. But when they want to be definite, they do what we do. They use the word the. See? They use the word the. And so, if you wanted to say, I saw Mayor of Monroe today, well, that you'd know who it is because you know we only have one mayor. But you'd have to put two and two together. But if I said, I saw the mayor, now that's definite, isn't it? See? That's a definite statement. Now, many times the Greek will use the word the, and it's not translated in our English translations because it would sound funny. Sometimes the word the is in there when the Greek doesn't have it because it would sound funny that is in there. And so let me give you an illustration of this. In your New Testament, now there's always an exception. There'll be one or two exceptions, but 99% of the time, when it uses the word God, it'll say the God. And I want you to know that the God sent Christ. And the God said this. And the God, and they use the word the in front of God. Now that sounds funny to your English ears. What would you think that I ought to be saying? I ought to leave out the the, shouldn't I? I'm going to tell you tonight about God. Now God is here, and God said this. Do you know which God I'm talking about? Well, you do. You do because of our language. Here in this country, we believe in one God. Now, it may be 50 years from now, with the way the world is going, there may be many religions, many gods. And then you've got to say, the God of Judah, the God of this, the God of that. But right now, in English, you say God, we all understand it. We all understand what it is. But in the New Testament, they use the word the. Why would they use the word the constantly, all the time? Why did they use that word the? Now go back to the culture. How many gods did they have in that culture? Millions. Millions upon millions of them. When Paul was in Athens, and he went by, and he saw all those statues, what was his problem? What did he say, see? You have all these gods, and I commend you for being religious. I want to commend you for being religious, but now I want to tell you about the God who created the heavens and the earth. Did he need to make a distinction there in Athens? Well, sure. If you went into Athens and you say, I'm a believer in God, what would all Athenians say? Me too. Me too. See? So in that culture, you had to put the in. Now, before church in the New Testament, you don't find the word the. It doesn't talk about the church. See? It talks about church. But now, what do you have to do in our culture today? How many churches are there in addition to the church you read about in the Bible? Well, they're all over the place. So you've got to say now, in the church, we do this. The church, you're talking about a definite church. And so I'm just telling you this because the translators have these problems that they have to do, so they put up with. Now, confession is one of them. when we talk about confession in the Bible, we talk about confession, not confession of stealing something, but a confession of Jesus. We all know what we're talking about, that Jesus is the Christ. Let's look at some statements. Paul here tells Timothy, fight the good fight of faith, lay hold on the life eternal, whereunto thou wast called, and didst confess the good confession in the sight of many witnesses. Now, Timothy, he confessed the good confession. One, the good confession. He confessed it. Jesus is the Christ. Now look here, Hebrews 4:14. Having then a great high priest who hath passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. Now I put the "thee" in blue because "thee" is in the Greek, but it's not in the English. You look in your English Bible and you won't see it in there. It'll sound funny. Let us hold fast our "the confession." How's that sound to you? See? That's the way the Greek reads it. Let us hold fast our "the confession." You say, boy, that sounds weird. Let us hold fast our confession. Now, you got the idea there's only one, don't you? See? You know that. But I'm pointing out that here they had that "the" in there. There's one. It's definite that's in there. Let us hold fast the confession. Now, I left that in red because it's in the English translation. That's the way you'll read it. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope, that it waver not. They glorify God for the obedience of the confession. Now, the article's in there. The is in there, see? But it sounds funny. Now, my point is, I just want you to see, as you go through that word confession, that the Bible was saying the confession. It was a definite confession. Now, with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. And here is a verb, so it's not in there. We confess something here, and we confess he is the Christ. So, all these things, Jesus then is our hope. He's everything. Now, we're introduced to him in this way. So now then, let's look here. It says, who was faithful to him that appointed him, as also was Moses in all his house. Now we're getting into an interesting aspect. Christ, who was faithful to him that appointed him. In your translations, do any of you have the word made instead of appointed? It is in any of them? I didn't check all of them. Okay. Reason I put this up here, again, and you'll read this in case you're reading commentaries, the word there is made. That he made him. And so a lot of people argue about, well, God made Christ then in some way. But when you talk about made, look at it like this. Again, we're kind of turning into a Greek class tonight, aren't we here? But it's okay. I want you to see it in case you're reading your commentaries. And Samuel said unto the people, it is Jehovah that appointed Moses and Aaron. That's the same Greek word. He made Moses and Aaron. He made them what? He made them the leaders. Look in Mark 3:14. Jesus. And he appointed 12 that they might be with him. That's the same word, made. Jesus made 12. He made the 12. Is it talking about creation? No. It means that he made them set in a certain position. He made them the 12 that he's going to set forth. So it's translated appointed for us then. So God appointed him to be his apostle and high priest. Jesus didn't just assume it, but God appointed him to do that. So now, Jesus was faithful to him that appointed him, and Moses was also faithful in all his house. So now we're going to get a comparison between Jesus and Moses. What was our comparison in chapter 1? Jesus and angels. Now then, it's Jesus and Moses. So let's compare them in there. So this begins the comparison of Jesus and Moses as he goes on down through. Well, he's going to show Jesus has more glory than Moses. Well, how much more does he have? He says he has more glory as the builder of the house has more glory than the house. Now, of course, you get to thinking about this. When you think about, well, I guess any question I could ask, who built the universe? It's Christ. Who built the Old Testament system of religion? Christ. Who built the church? It was Christ. It's Christ, God working through Christ doing all of these things. Now, Christ is the builder. And as the builder is more glorious than the house, so it's Christ that's more glorious than Moses. It was Christ's system that created Moses, called Moses, went with Moses, followed Moses, helped Moses, and did all of this. Now look at a house. Dave Willie is building a big house out here. Now, when he gets that built, in fact, right now, you drive by it, and as you drive by it, you go, wow. And he takes you in, it's not finished, you go, wow. Now, when he gets through with it, we all go up there for a party. We're going to show us the house, and we're going to say, wow, look at this house. This is a glorious house. Who's going to get the credit? Will Dave get more credit than the house, or the house get more credit than Dave? We'll say, Dave, how did you do this? It took his planning, it took his money, it took his skills. He's greater than that house. House burns down, Dave's still here, what can happen? He can build another house. Now he said, that really is the relationship of Christ with Moses in here. Now, here are New Testament scriptures that we're not going to go through because you know them. They're all scriptures that talk about the church being the temple of God. That here we have the temple of God, the house of God, where God dwells. That's church in here. And of course, Christ established a church. But now, the Old Testament religion under Moses, was also called a house. God said about Moses, my servant Moses is not so, that is, he's not like the other prophets. He is faithful in all my house. So now, in the house of God in the Old Testament, the Jewish religion, Moses was faithful. In the religion of Christ, Christ is faithful. So they were both faithful that's in there. Again it says, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. So God dwelled among the old people on the old covenant like he dwells among us that's in here. I will dwell among the children of Israel and be their God. So the Old Testament people, Old Testament religion was called the house of God. So now you have house in the New Testament, house in the Old Testament. Jesus is faithful under the New. Moses was faithful under the Old. But Moses was faithful as a servant, and Christ was faithful as a son. As a son. Now, if you have somebody who's building a house, and he builds this grand, glorious house, and he has a son, and this son is actually doing the building of this house. Now then, you also have a servant. You have a carpenter out here that's working. Who's going to get the most glory? Is it going to be the son that actually does the building, or is it going to be the servant that drove the nails, see, that obeyed him? And so he said, this is comparison. He's trying to show them. This is how we have it in there. Now, we are the house of God, he says, if, he puts a stipulation on it. You and I now, We are the house of God if we hold fast. Now, that's the definition of holding fast. It's a possession we hold back. The idea behind that, the lexicons tell us, is that if you have a person that has some property, some land, suppose we got up here, somebody sitting up here and got 20 acres. And so they're going to sell 15 acres. But you're not going to touch this 5. I've got this 5 set out here. And somebody said, we want to buy all 20 acres. No, I'll sell you the 15, but I'm not selling you this 5. What's he doing? He's holding it back. He's holding it fast. It's in his possession. Now, we have something in our possession, and we're not going to get rid of it. We might get rid of anything else we have, but we're not going to get rid of this. Let us hold fast our boldness. Now, the word boldness means freeness and boldness of speech. It's an inward state of full and undisturbed confidence. It's cheerful courage. It's fearless confidence. It's this confidence now that we have, that we are saved by Christ. We have a high priest that's in heaven that we know is going to be faithful to God and do everything there right. And he's merciful to us, and he will consider our problems, and he will take care of that. We can be bold. So you could say, Lowell, how do you know? Why do you have such confidence? Do you know everything is going right in heaven about you? Yeah. Well, what makes you so smart? I'm not. I don't even know how to get up there. But Christ is my high priest. Christ's taking care of it. Well, what makes you think that you're okay down here? Well, I'm not. You see, I sin. But I have a high priest that's merciful. And I can go to him and I can tell him, Father, I sinned. I stumbled. I have a weakness. And he's a merciful high priest. He can understand. He's been there. He's walked in my shoes. So now we have this boldness. Boy, you really have confidence then. Yeah. Not because of our abilities, not because of our knowledge, but it's because of that great high priest. So let us hold fast our boldness. Then the glory in here that he talks about in here. Let us hold fast our boldness and the glory of our hope. Now the word glory is that which one glory or can glorify in. It's a matter or ground of glorying. There are certain things we need to glory and boast about, but it's not our own achievements. We can glory. We can hold in high esteem. We can be happy about. We can be proud about what our high priest has done for us. So that's what it's saying. Now the glory of our hope. Well, there's only one hope, Ephesians 4:4 tells us. Of course, that's heaven. And the word hope means that which we desire and expect to receive. Now then, I can hold fast on this. I can glory in it. I know I've got it. We have salvation. How do we know this? Not by our own strength, but because of our high priest. We have a high priest who's faithful to God, merciful to us, and so we know we have it. And so we can glory in that. Now you have this boldness and glory and hope, firm. That means stable, fast, firm, sure, steadfast, established. Don't waver. Don't go to bed tonight worrying. Don't get up tomorrow worrying. Your high priest will stay awake all night. You don't have to worry. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He's there. So he's there, and we got it firm unto the end. So how long do you keep this confidence? Until you die. Just keep it until the end. Revelation 2:10 tells us how long. Be thou faithful unto what? Unto death. So you be faithful until you die. Because you can have that confidence because Jesus Christ is our high priest. Okay, there's where we stop tonight.